Guys, I want to thank the following sponsors of the podcast. I want to thank GoHunt.com, my friend Cody Nelson of 25 plus years. I call him the glassing guru. He's the optics authority. He's the optics manager at GoHunt.com Gear Shop. If you guys have any interest in purchasing optics at all or have any questions, give Cody a call directly at 702-847-8747. That's extension 2. You can also email him directly at optics@gohunt.com or call him or text him on his cell phone, 602-399-3699. I want to thank GoHunt Optics Department for their sponsorship of this podcast. I also want to thank the GoHunt Insider. Remind you guys that if you go to gohunt.com/jscott, you're going to get a $50 GoHunt Gear Shop gift card just for signing up. I also want to thank KUIU Ultralight Hunting. You can find out more about KUIU, which is the gear that I wear on all of my hunts. I also wear it on my fishing trips. Pretty much everything I wear. You can go to their website, which is KUIU.com, KUIU.com, to find out more. It's also a direct-to-consumer website, so you won't find this in any retailers. You can order directly off the website. Go to KUIU.com, KUIU.com. Phonescope.com, use the JScott20 promo code. You're going to get a 10% discount on all orders. Guys, I also want to tell you about a new sponsor of the podcast, Kyle Lynch, who is also a former Army Ranger who served with the 2nd Battalion, the 75th Ranger Regiment in Iraq and Afghanistan. Kyle has also been a deputy sheriff and volunteer firefighter, and he is really involved on the tactical side. He is actually co-owner of a company based in Georgia called Armageddon Gear. They do a ton of stuff that serves the military and commercial, tactical, and competitive shooting markets. But he has designed a really cool elk call carrier, and he's launched a new website called allelk.com. Go check out the Bugle Mule. The Bugle Mule is a mouth call elk call carrier that is he's made it where it fits right out on the outside of a bugle tube. It carries up to 3 calls. Go check it out at allelk.com. For a limited time, the J. Scott Outdoors podcast listeners can get a 10% discount there at allelk.com. Put in the promo code JSO10 for 10% off. I want to thank allelk.com. I want to thank Kyle for his service to our country, and I want to thank him for the sponsorship of this podcast. Guys, without these podcast sponsors, I wouldn't be able to put the amount of time that I do into this. So I want to thank them, and I want to thank you. Let's get right into the episode.
Welcome to the J. Scott Outdoors podcast. Today we have a very special show. We actually have a great friend of mine, Steve Chappell of Chappell Guide Service, and I've known Steve a long time. I think it probably goes back to the late 90s. And I first met Steve on an elk hunt. His dad had an elk hunt in Arizona, and Steve has become one of the best elk outfitting and guide services in Arizona, and we've been friends a long time. He's a fantastic elk caller. He's a fantastic hunter, and he's a great family man, has a lovely wife, Barb, and two beautiful girls, and I've known Steve a long time, and I consider him a great friend, and the listeners are really in for a treat today because Steve really knows what he's talking about when it comes to elk hunting, and I'm going to be able to bend his ear a little bit today and see if I can draw some of that knowledge and some of that experience out of him. And we're going to talk about elk hunting, and we're going to talk about a lot of topics. So, Steve, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great, Jay. I'm excited to be with you today.
Yeah, this will be fun. Steve, how did you get your start in hunting?
You know, I grew up in very rural Colorado, out in the country, lived out on a dirt road, and man, from the time I was 5 or 6 years old, my dad and my granddad were hunters, and so I was always tagging along with them. I can remember it was probably 5 or 6 years old when I tagged along with my dad on his first mule deer hunt. And I mean, it was just addicting from the very beginning. Getting up early in the morning, just the smells of the trees, and just the sights, and the sun coming up in the morning, just everything about it. I just was immediately hooked. And you know how that is when you're a little kid like that. You feel really fortunate and blessed that your dad includes you, because you're tagging along, probably making 90% of the noise and the movement, doing your best to mess up the hunt, but your dad still comes through and gets a great deer, and then just walking up to a big buck with your dad, and how touching the antlers and just how the animal smells. It's just it was just all amazing from the very beginning.
Yeah, and I mean, I know your dad well, and he's a fantastic hunter. He's a houndsman, and he's just a real savvy guy, and he's just a real true woodsman. And I'm sure growing up as a kid, getting to learn from him was a real treat. I mean, because he's one of these guys that does it right, and very knowledgeable, quiet and
yes.
humble, but really, really knows what he's doing. Type of guy, when he speaks, people listen, and I'm sure that was a real treat, getting to really watch how it's done.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I would say my dad was definitely my best teacher in life and in hunting. You and I actually met for the first time there on my dad's hunt, which was, by the way, in 1995. So you can believe that's been 20 years ago.
That's unbelievable. That makes you and I fairly old.
Yeah. You and I really have kind of grown up together in elk hunting, because I feel like I was still really a pretty green elk hunter and elk caller at that time. And I'll be honest, that's where I really, really got the bug, Jay, for elk. That's when elk just became my absolute favorite animal. And I've almost gotten to where it's really ridiculous that elk is about all that matters to me anymore. It was kind of that one trip where I decided that I've got to be a part of this every single year. Even if it's not me personally hunting, that I would rather be sharing the woods with people that have a great tag, like we have in Arizona with the great elk we have there, versus me chasing small elk in an over-the-counter state like maybe Colorado or somewhere like that. I just decided that year that I had to be a part of that type of elk hunting every year.
That's amazing that it was 1995. I specifically remember you and your dad and meeting you, and I want to say that you even had a hat on that said Elkaholic, or some, maybe a shirt or something. And I thought, man, this guy, I gotta meet this guy. And if I remember correctly, and the details are a little fuzzy, but it seemed like you were using maybe a Carlton or maybe a double reed, and I had just gotten some new Primos pallet plates, I believe, and I think, I gotta be honest, I think I even remember like getting one like that I had already used, because I didn't have any new ones, and you're like, what is that call?
Yep.
And you popped it in your mouth and were immediately, ripping and making some great sounds. Remember that? That was
totally. I don't know that I was making good sounds right off the bat. You're way too kind there, but I actually had a Lohman diaphragm call.
Lohman, okay.
I don't even know if they're around anymore. Maybe they are. But yes, you're exactly right. You gave me a black Primos Sentry pallet plate call, and absolutely the first time I popped it in my mouth, I could tell right away a difference in that call versus just the standard diaphragms that did not have that pallet plate incorporated into the call. And so I mean, you're the one that introduced me to that pallet plate.
Well, I certainly didn't bring the story up to make it sound like I introduced you to calling, because you were already very well established when I met you. But what do you think it is, Steve, about that style of call compared to the older style of call, or maybe the traditional style that's just the horseshoe without any sort of plate or anything? What do you think it is that has really caught on, and for you it was a game changer right off the bat? Why is that, do you think?
I think there's a couple of reasons. First off, that really just helps with positioning the call at the right angle in the top of your mouth. There's no guesswork with getting it right. And I think because you have a solid anchor there and a solid starting point, You just get more consistent tones right off the bat. Another thing with those palate plate calls that I've noticed is that the frame width is narrower. Now the tape width can be the same, but the frame width is narrower, which in my opinion and experience makes a call easier to blow and requires less air pressure overall. And that way you can not only blow loud sounds, but I think more sensitive, subtle sounds are as important, if not more important. And I think that's where those palate plate calls just really shine.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, Steve, through it all, and 20 years later, you now, for years, have had your own signature series calls with the diaphragms and with the different external calls. Can you go in a little bit on how that transition took place and how all of that came to be?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, like we talked about, I just immediately saw in the beginning that palate plate was definitely a cut above. I think it's probably one of the most, if not the most, extraordinary ideas that's come to elk calling, in the last 40 years or however long elk calls have been along, because it's lasted. It's not been a flash in the pan type of thing. Rocky Jacobson, by the way, was the guy who originally invented the palate plate. And we know, of course, that Primos, got a lot of notoriety from those calls. Rocky still manufactures those. I was able to meet Rocky actually through a good friend of ours, Corey, who happens to be Rocky's son, and he introduced me to his dad. And Rocky and I got to talking about elk calls and elk calling, and I had some ideas. I actually had a prototype for an open reed call that I showed to him, and that's kind of how it all got started. I think you and I both are pretty opinionated as far as tone quality and just how we want a call to sound. I think that's right in knowing you for about 20 years that we both have pretty strong ideas on what we think a call should sound like. And so, I brought some of those ideas to Rocky, and he took those back to the factory and went to work on it. And he mailed calls back and forth to me, different prototypes back and forth, and I just really feel like really nailed it right on the head. As far as we've got 3 mouth diaphragms that are my signature series mouth diaphragms. There's one that's called the Estrus Excited reed. It's an orange colored reed. Then we have another one that's called the Closer. It's a red tape diaphragm that's kind of a hybrid double reed call. It's not a full double reed. It's got one single reed and then a cut reed on the second reed. And then we also have a blue reed that's called the Challenge call. It's a little more sensitive and a little higher pitched than the other 2 calls. So they each kind of have their purpose and specialty, and I think everybody's going to kind of have their preference just based on how they blow a call and how they want a call to sound. But for me, they work really well. As I mentioned earlier, the first call that I showed to Rocky was a prototype that we actually ended up with the Matriarch, which is an open reed call. It's got a mylar reed, similar to like the Primos Hyperlip single or the Carlton Estrus wine. It's similar to that. The difference is that it has a wood barrel. And for, I would say, about a decade, I was always intrigued with how an open reed mylar call would sound with a wood barrel. And when we developed this call, I'm just extremely pleased with the tonal quality that you get out. I think you get just a richness and sweetness that you just can't quite get out of plastic with that call.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, and I, to this day, tell everybody that I know that the best external reed elk caller I've ever heard in my life is you, and I stand by that. I believe there's not anybody on the planet that can blow an external call as good as you can. And quite honestly, with the advancements you've made with your diaphragm calling, I mean, it's mind-boggling. But originally, you and I used to, go chase elk and guide elk and, hunt elk together and stuff. And I'm always, can always remember in the back of my mind just how sweet you can make those external reed calls sound. So the Matriarch call was built to your specific specifications with the soundboard and the mylar width and length and the whole and all the way down to the wood barrel, correct?
Yes, exactly. Rocky and I kind of exchanged back and forth with him sending me various prototypes, and it took a few times, to be honest. Kind of made me feel a little bit bad, but I knew what I wanted, and I tell you what, when it came back, how it is ultimately now, right away from the first blow, like I said, I'm pretty opinionated on how I want an elk call to sound, and it was just absolute right on the money. So, yeah, very, very pleased with that. I think a mylar open reeded call is just like a mouth reed, in that a guy's got to spend the time to really get comfortable and confident in it, because I'm sure you would agree, Jay, that when you go to the woods, that's the real proving grounds. And if you blow it just a little bit in the off season, then you get out there in the woods and there's a bull out there bugling in front of you, it's a real humbling experience, and it can those nerves can really take over. And if you haven't spent the time on the call to practice, your nerves can definitely get in the way.
Absolutely. And Steve, talk a little bit about open reed calling, and what I witness with guys out in the woods when I hear guys not making quality sounds. One of the biggest things that I hear is A, they're too loud, and B, they're real harsh, and somewhere along the lines that we've been taught to and
right.
Just be obnoxious. Talk to me a little bit about if you agree with that as far as that perception, and in your mind when you're actually calling with your external call, what are you thinking? What are you trying to portray with that call, and what tone, what sound, what are you thinking with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything you just said right there. I believe that on an open reed call, that being subtle and sweet is the key, and having that nice, subtle, sweet, elky tone is what you want. I kind of equate it to this. If I go into a restaurant and there's somebody talking very loudly and kind of dominating the environment, it kind of sets me off a little bit. It's just a little distracting, and for me, it's kind of the same way in the elk woods. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, but when I go out there, I have the mindset of wanting to sweet talk to that bull and just whisper in his ear and give him that opportunity for romance.
Do you think that? And sorry if I interrupted you. Do you think that it's just been taught incorrectly, or do you think the reason that people get real loud and real abrasive on the call is because it takes a little bit of finesse, and you have to work with your call a little bit to get that a little bit more controlled and sweet sound? It's almost to me like that's just a way, since they're not very good with their call, that it's just easy for them to blow it loud and blow it abrasive.
Yeah, exactly. It's easier that way if you don't spend a lot of time and learn real breath control. And to be honest with you, it starts with emotion control. Like I was saying earlier, it's amazing how it can get to you when you get out there in the woods and there's a bull bugling in front of you, and you get that kind of shortness of breath and get that more choppy breath instead of the deep breaths that you need to take to make yourself relax. I kind of go back to this. When I was young and I played baseball and I would get up there to hit, of course, anybody that's played baseball would agree with me. It's a very nerve-wracking thing. But what I would do is, in my mind, I would place myself in my yard with my dad pitching to me, and I would literally say to myself, groove one right down the middle, Dad, and I'm going to rip it right back at you. You know what I mean? I'm going to knock your head off with the ball. I'm going to hit a line drive right back at you. And it sounds kind of unrelated to elk calling, but what I try to do is when I have a bull in front of me, is put myself in that kind of comfortable spot. In other words, maybe blowing the call in the study in my house. I kind of take my mind there, or maybe in my truck where I'm just relaxed and blowing and just imagine myself being there. and it kind of takes me away from the intensity of the moment, if you know what I'm saying. I still obviously want to enjoy the moment because there's nothing like September out there in the woods, but I think if you let your mind just go too crazy, because I think calling is so mental. Besides knowing the sound that you want to make, a lot of it is just mental and emotion control. To get those sweeter, more subtle sounds that we're talking about that are the key to calling these bulls in.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything you're saying there. Do you have an external nearby that you could give me a little sequence of kind of how you just blow that call, and maybe talk a little bit about, are you blowing just straight out of your with your mouth, or are you sucking the air out of your diaphragm? Could you give me a little demonstration?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've got a Matriarch here, and
okay.
the first thing, like you said there, you want to think about getting the air from deep in your stomach. In other words, from a deep breath, just as if you were singing or blowing a musical instrument. That's what I would equate it to. So you're not wanting to just huff the sound through your mouth. Because what that tends to do is give you those more harsh, loud, brash sounds, and it also tends to direct more saliva into the call, which is ultimately going to make it stick pretty quickly. Also, another thing is your lips. They're the real key. I've always felt that the key to blowing these calls is to use your lips rather than your teeth on the call. So what I'm actually doing is I'm wrapping my lips around my teeth to start with, to kind of pad the mylar reed with my lips rather than having my teeth directly on it. And then I'm just thinking about getting a nice controlled deep breath, and then just directing nice, soft, consistent air pressure over the reed as I blow it with my lips on it. And I'm not sliding the call in and out at all. To get the varying tones, I'm just varying my lip pressure. So a firmer lip pressure is going to give me a higher pitch, and softer lip pressure is going to give me a deeper pitch. It's going to sound something like this. Okay, just something like that.
And Steve, can I add something there? I've seen you do it so many times. When you put the external call up to your lips, I've watched you do it enough, and I actually incorporated it into my own calling. You actually kind of slowly and real precisely kind of set it in there and gently. You don't just jam it in your mouth. You bring your lips. Talk a little bit about your lip placement and about your lip pressure that you were talking about before. I mean, it's a real precise thing. I've seen you do it a million times. Talk about that.
Yeah, maybe I over-exaggerated a little bit, but you're right. I'm very methodical about it. I think maybe that's just my personality, but I kind of equate it to shooting a bow. I like to have, I almost call them anchor points. In other words, I'm thinking about definitely wrapping my lips around my teeth at the proper pressure. A guy that's new to this is just going to have to experiment a little bit with what that right lip pressure is. And then secondarily, I think about sliding the call. This call has a castration ring on it, and I've got the ring, I'd say about 80% in on the call toward the barrel. I'm going to get my lips right up close to that castration band, to where I can actually feel them just above my lip line there. I can feel that castration ring. And then I'm also going to touch the middle knuckle of my index finger on the end of my nose, kind of as my anchor point. And that just makes it consistent for me, because I think that's the key with getting consistency when you're out there, when everything's going on and the nerves are running high. The more repeatable you can make it, the more consistent you're going to be.
And you also, and the listeners can go on Steve's YouTube channel, can get any one of Steve's DVDs and watch him doing this, but you also hold the call precisely and allow your three fingers, your middle finger, your ring finger, and your pinky finger, almost to kind of stand up like you're making the OK symbol, right? Like you're touching your thumb and your forefinger together, and you kind of opened your hand.
Exactly. Because I think a mistake that can be made is you can tend to, not want to make a bad sound, and so you'll tend to choke the call down, and that's not going to sound as natural. So yes, I will circle the call with my index finger and my thumb, because I think it kind of lends itself to producing a nice nasal quality when you do that. But then you are correct. I do leave my other fingers pretty much open. Occasionally I'll bring my end finger down to deflect the sound a little bit. But I mostly call pretty open, I would say, with my hand to get that tone that I'm looking for.
That's great. And Steve, so you initially just blew just a couple real soft mews. Give me something where, the bull is definitely interested, but maybe give me a little more emotion. Give me something that you're gonna use out in the woods, and maybe really try and entice that bull to come check you out.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of just like with turkey calling. You're taking every bull's temperature, and the more he responds to it, if he sounds excited and emotional about his response, then I'll typically add just a little more emotion to my call, although I don't want to overdo it, because I'm a real believer in continuing to do what he's liking. But, I might turn it up a little and make this type of sound. And, a lot of people ask me, how frequently do I call? Typically when I'm calling to a bull, I'll call and then I'll wait for him to bugle. And then when he bugles, I'll give him an answer back. But generally I'm blowing anywhere from maybe 1 to 3 calls back at him. I'm not gonna pound him and do 5 or 10 calls and just sound like I'm really loudmouthed and over aggressive out there. But as long as he's liking what I'm giving him, that's what I'm going to continue to do. Just keep pour it on him. And by the way, I never mix in an odd sound. Like for instance, if he's coming into a cow call, if I'm blowing an open reed like I'm doing here, I'm not going to start glunking at him. I'm not going to start bugling at him. I'm just going to give him what he's responding to and what he's coming to.
Absolutely. I think that's a great tip. And I think, being a turkey hunter, I find myself wanting to cluck, purr, yelp, do the whole thing. And it's like, yes, you hear turkeys doing it sometimes, but a lot of times they're just kind of doing their thing. They're not running through the full gamut of the calling contest out there in the woods. That's just not how they communicate. And I think elk are the same way in that,
absolutely.
You're basically just saying, I'm available over here. I'd like you to come over here. What are you doing? Come over here. Instead of saying, what are you doing? What do you want for dinner? How you don't just run through the whole question and he's going to think, I'm not going. That's a mess waiting to happen over there.
Yeah, the class 30 questions. You're exactly right about that.
You just come home from the office and you get 40 questions before you even set your briefcase down. I mean, that's just not going to cut it. Steve, at the end of your call, I think what's different from your call than 99.9% of everybody else out there is you're able to have that just nice, I don't even know what the word is, but there's like a transition where you're into your note and then you're kind of letting it get real nasally. How could you explain that to people as far as getting as nasally as possible? I know it's hard to explain, but what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's obviously breath and air control first off, and then I think secondarily it's just having a subtle shift in lip pressure, not too abrupt there at the end, because you're going from that firmer lip pressure to a lighter, more medium lip pressure there at the end. And there's definitely, if you watch yourself in the mirror or something when you blow a call, you'll see that your jaw and chin are going to drop to get that tone change. But again, I think it's just being subtle about it, rather than like you say, jamming the call in your mouth, making a harsh tone and then dropping your jaw real fast. I think that to say, predator calling than elk calling, where I think
Sure.
being subtle and sweet is more important.
Sure, and a lot of the DVDs and the instructional stuff out there have talked about really sliding the call as far as making a big move from the front of the call towards the castration band. And I learned from you on the external, and I mean, it's all about lip pressure with you. It's not about moving half an inch on the call. In reality, your lips are not moving back or forward in any direction. It's staying the same, but your lip pressure is looser and tighter, and you are not a proponent of sliding that call in and out.
Yeah, not at all. I think it makes it more repeatable if you're just varying lip pressure. And something else that needs to be brought up is when we're out there elk hunting, we're not in the ideal environment. By that I mean we're not sitting in our office or in our truck where it's 70, 75 degrees and our body's warm, our lips and mouth are warm. No, it's more like we're out there. It can be anywhere from the low to high 30s on a typical September morning. You've walked a mile and a half to even get in position to blow your first call at these elk. And by that time, you're a little short of breath. Your lips are dry. It's just a lot different than being in a stationary 70-degree environment. So with that said, I think the more repeatable you can make it by varying your lip pressure versus sliding the call in and out, where you may have dry, gummed-up lips by the time you've walked a mile and a half or more chasing a herd, I definitely think it makes you more consistent and more sweet when you're just varying your lip pressure on the call.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, Steve, you created the Matriarch call, and then you have a new call, external call, I believe, don't you?
Yes. It's called the Trophy Wife. I don't want to come across as gimmicky because I'm a big proponent in saying that a call that sounds elky will call elk in now. It will call elk in 20 years from now. I'm a firm believer in that. But obviously for marketing, a catchy name is important. But I want to tell guys out there that you don't necessarily need to, when you're shopping for an elk call, be so mindful of what is the newest call on the market or what call has the coolest name. It's more so, what does it sound like to you? Does it sound elky to you? And when you take it out there and use it in the elk woods, does it call elk in? And if it does, again, it's going to be a call that's going to do that for decades for you. But back to that, I was tossing around about 20 different names, and then just all of a sudden, Trophy Wife came to my mind, and I just thought, every big old bull out there needs a trophy wife. So that
I love the name.
That name stuck right away. But what
I love the name and the call, by the way. I was able to pick one up, and I love it. It's got a really good sound. Do you happen to have one of those that you could demonstrate for us?
Yeah, and I think what separates it from other calls, and including the Matriarch, is that it's got a clear mylar reed, which is a little more sensitive than just the white standard mylar reed. So right there, it's going to have a little different tonal quality. I believe it's a little more. It's got a little more voice, a little more nasal quality to it. It does have a plastic barrel, but I think in combination with that clear mylar reed, it has just the right tone. And here's what it sounds like. Yeah, and that's the Trophy Wife. Again, you're using the same technique that you would blow the Matriarch with, but I think definitely that call in combination with the Matriarch. So some days. Matter of fact, a couple of years ago, when I first had the prototype of the Trophy Wife, I was out in the woods and happened to be blowing the Matriarch because it's worked for me for the last 5 years so well and continually does. But I did have one bull in particular that got just a little bit hesitant, and I pulled out that Trophy Wife and started blowing it, and it fired him right up, and he came right in on a string. So
that's awesome. How often will you blow the Matriarch a little bit and get some bulls responding, and then blow the trophy wife, just give them just a little bit different sound, or will you primarily just stick with one and just run one?
I'm more so, if I had to say, a one-call kind of guy, and I think, again, it kind of goes back to my methodical personality. I'll just get in a groove with the call. I think you would agree, you get calls that you just feel really comfortable and confident in, whether they be open reed or a nice broke-in diaphragm. So yeah, I lean more so to be more of a one-call type of guy, but I will, based on the situation, if a bull's not responding or I'm not getting responses, period, I'll try something different because, definitely you don't want to keep trying what's not working.
Absolutely. Both of those external calls are fantastic. I've used the Matriarch for ever since it came out, and I also like the Primos Hyperlip single and use both of them. And I can't wait to try this trophy wife out in the woods. It's got a real nice sound. To me, it almost sounds a little bit like a younger cow, just like and I don't know that it's a huge difference, but it seems kind of hot. If that it's kind of. Yeah. It's kind of just got a little bit of pizzazz. I don't know if that's the right word, but you kind of know what I'm saying. It's just got a little bit of a pop to it.
Right.
And I really like the way it sounded. You can get these calls, my listeners can get these calls right off your website, right, at Chappell Guide Service?
Yes, chappellguideservice.com, and just go on to the elk call page. There's plenty of links to click on there to get to that page. I do sell these calls in package deals, so there's lots of money can be saved if you order more than one call. I also offer free shipping because I don't think a guy should get penalized, for making an online order. And I even offer them in combination with videos or DVDs, I should say. So yeah, sure. All in all, I think my website's a great place to get these calls, and I appreciate all the business I get on the website, and I'm always a proponent of saying you don't want to try out and learn the calls on the elk. In other words, you don't want to order the call September 1st because you're going to be learning and trying it out on the elk. If you make it a habit of blowing that call, when I first started out, I'd say I blew an elk call probably 300 days out of the year, and I don't mean you had to blow it an hour, but maybe 5 or 10 minutes a day. It just keeps it fresh. That to me is where you can experiment and learn new and different sounds that you never thought you could produce before. So yeah, I say all that to say this: the earlier you get your calls, regardless of if they're mine or Primos or whoever's calls you happen to use, and practice on them, yearly instead of just very seasonally, the better off you're going to be calling elk in.
Yeah, I mean. I've actually, my buddy Giannis from Colorado, now Montana, I turned him on years ago to your Matriarch call, and I mean, he just loves that call, and he's very good with it. Ironically, Steve, he actually blows it upside down. I know you know some other people that blow it upside down, but it just makes some really nice, sweet sounds, and your DVDs, you can listen to you calling on the DVDs as well as your YouTube channel. You have a bunch of demonstrations of the call, and I just urge any of the listeners that haven't heard Steve call a lot, if you want to learn how to elk call, or if you want to hone your elk calling skills, that is the place to go. He is the guy to listen to. He will sit here and be humble with you, but the reality is, if you want to get better, get some of Steve's calls and listen and watch what he's doing. He is as good as they get, and I've always told Steve if he would ever enter the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation calling contest, he would win hands down, and I'm a firm believer in that. But that's not his gig, and he's that I know, and Steve's the best elk caller there is out there. So check him out on his YouTube. Is it Steve Chappell, or is it Chappell Hunt? What is the YouTube channel?
Yeah, I
Steve?
originally set it up as just Steve Chappell. So yeah, it's just Steve Chappell on there. I'm not sure. I don't believe that I have a link off of my website, but I always have a featured video on my website on the home page where people can see that. And yes, I agree with you. That's the best place to actually learn to blow the calls from a starting point, is to watch those YouTube videos that are actually on my website on the elk call page. And then as far as, how often to blow them, just how we use them when we're actually out there in the field is to actually watch that on those hunting DVDs, on those Extreme Bulls DVDs. I'll tell you this, Jay. I don't know about you, but I think I learned the most about elk hunting by watching videos back in the day. Those VHS videos that Will Primo's put out and Wayne Carlton put out, because I feel like if you watch them as a student of the game and not just an observer, if you actually say, okay, the bull just bugled, what is the hunter going to do in response to that? What call did he blow? How many times did he blow it? How loudly did he blow it, or how softly did he blow it? To be honest with you, I think you can learn more by watching a hunting video than you can an instructional video per se, because those in my mind, obviously just by design, are a little more canned, if you will. Whereas,
exactly. I mean, sorry to cut you off, but I mean, I know you well enough to know that your hunting elk DVDs, your Extreme Bulls series, I mean, you can actually hear you in the background calling, and it's not edited. It's what it is. So you get to hear the real thing. I can't honestly speak for the other companies. I think there's some editing going on, but I know how you call, and I've listened to your DVDs. I know how you work bulls, and it's what you hear is what you get. So, you're absolutely right. You can learn Steve's sequencing by just listening to his Extreme Bulls series and listening to how he does it. Steve, I want to transition a little bit into your diaphragms. Okay. Having said that, you can blow an external as good as anybody I know, when I first met you, and for a few years, you were good with a diaphragm, but there was a point in time when you absolutely raised your game to a completely different level. And I know you practiced, Steve is a farmer by trade and spends a lot of time on a tractor, and I know I would call you a lot and you would say, yeah, listen to this, and I'd just be blown away on the phone. Let's dive into your signature series, mouth diaphragms, mouth reeds, and maybe walk me through the progression of that. I will remember back in the day, and again, you can correct me if it seems like the older I get, the more that stories are, get made up in my head, but seems like we had just piles of elk calls, and one day, I think you called me up and said, hey, listen to this, and I said, what the heck did you do? And you had just gotten the idea to actually trim the double reed latex and trim a diagonal or a diamond cut in it. And talk to me a little bit about tinkering with that kind of stuff and how it led you into your signature series elk calls.
You know what, Jay? That was a true story, and I'd forgotten about that. You're exactly right. I'd gotten a prototype call from Will Primo's, which was a straight double reed call, and it was just, for me anyway, it was just a little hard to blow. It was a pallet plate call, but even with that double reed, it just required quite a bit of air pressure. So what I did, and I don't even know really why I did this, but I just took a little pair of surgical scissors and I just cut kind of a V in that outside reed of the two, that outside latex reed, and popped it back in my mouth, and it was amazing how much easier it was to blow, and the tonal quality was just excellent. So yeah, I called you up, was real excited about it. I think it was in the late 90s maybe, and ended up ultimately ended up being, I believe, the hyperplate that Primos produces. Now with my signature series calls, that is actually the closer would be the closest replication of that call that I originally worked with there. I think that closer call that I have now is excellent for bugling because it's very durable, because it has the strength of being a double reed call, so you've got that durability, but then it's also got sensitivity because trimming that second reed just tends to make it easier to blow and gives it just the right tonal quality. So I think it's the best of both worlds as far as a bugling and a cow calling reed, kind of a utility call, I should say.
Absolutely. And Steve, in your signature series mouth calls, I believe you have 3 different mouth calls. Can you run through, and I don't know if you have them on hand, but could you maybe demonstrate the 3 of them and maybe talk about the differences?
Sure. The first one that I'll start with is the estrus excited reed. Again, I don't want guys to get hung up on the name of these calls. Obviously they have to have a name for the packaging and such, but the main differences in them is going to be latex thickness, latex stretch, and whether it's a single or a double, and then also the frame width. So without getting too technical on it, this would be that estrus excited, which is the orange reed. I prefer it overall for doing my cow calling because it's very sensitive, but it also produces just a nice full 3-dimensional elky tone is what I really like about it. This was what it would sound like just doing what I would refer to as just a standard nasally cow call.
Stay tuned for part 2, elk calling with Steve Chappell.